Today, I undertake the beginning of a personal challenge, finding the most obscure relic of geek culture that I can still make a whole episode out of. And so our topic for this week, Yogi Bear's collar. Now, you've noticed, right, that Yogi Bear and many of the other Hanna-Barbera animal characters of the same late 50s, early 60s era have this, right? A shirt collar or tie, but not a shirt or any other clothing. You ever wonder why that is? And I don't mean like the logic of it. He's a talking bear. Logic kind of stops applying long before you get to the collar. I'm talking about why they decided to draw him like that in the first place. Well, believe it or not, this unassuming little animation detail represents a genuine cultural turning point that helped shape the course and change the very history of animation, television, and popular culture itself. See, as you may have heard, TV is weird! To understand the significance of Yogi's collar, you first have to understand some of the history of TV animation, specifically that in the era where Yogi Bear would make his debut, the very idea of doing animation for TV was considered damn near revolutionary. See, by the mid-1950s, advertisers and affiliates had become keenly aware that young children were making up a much bigger than initially expected segment of the television audience, and they really wanted to reach them. The only problem was producing content that kids would actually want to watch. The obvious answer was cartoons, but there was a pretty big roadblock to that. Animation, especially in the hand-drawn era, took way too long and was much too expensive for a television schedule. And while repackaging old movie theater cartoons was one solution, that was a finite resource, so smaller animation studios flew into a kind of reverse arms race trying to find shortcuts to produce cartoons on ultra-low budgets. Now here's one really weird example from the same era, Clutch Cargo, which barely animated its actual drawings but opted to make up for it by giving their chatterbox cast very expressive mouths when speaking, via a process called Synchrovox whereby a live actor's lips were superimposed onto cartoon drawings. Take a look.
Look at Clutch! He picked up the ball!
From now on, keep your eyes open.
What brings you here?
Wow! Look at all those bananas!
Yes, it is normal to be way the hell creeped out by that. But by far the biggest initial innovator in early TV animation was Hanna-Barbera. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera had cut their teeth in the theatrical cartoon biz, but moving to TV, they set about developing methods that would allow for the production of visually engaging animation without the need for theatrical-level budgets. Mainly, they concentrated on streamlining character animation, pioneering techniques like building the characters in layers, where only certain parts like limbs or eyes needed to be animated rather than redrawing the entire character. Those of you who've worked with Flash and other modern animation programs may regard that as a well, duh, today, but in the late 50s, this was a huge breakthrough. Oh, incidentally, this is also why anime, which was typically being done on an even lower budget than most Western TV cartoons in any given era, got so into mecha and robots early on. Machines need to be animated less because people aren't expecting to see them moving all the time. See, character animation is tough. Too little movement and you break the spell, but too much movement does the same thing. And when your budget is so low you're cutting corners off the corners, it gets even tougher. Plenty of animators will tell you that in a pinch, you focus on the face, which is the most expressive and identifiable part of an anthropomorphized character. But animating a face tends to also mean animating a head, which can also mean having to animate adjustment gestures made by the rest of the body by the positioning of that head. Unless, of course, you could animate the head separately from the body without the obvious giveaway of the head being constantly placed in front of the rest of the figure. Enter the collar. Yogi's collar and tie, being a different color and made of clearly different material than the rest of his body, essentially create a clear dividing line between his body and head. By essentially placing the head element behind the body and concealing the lack of an actual neck connecting the two with the collar, Yogi's head could be animated as a wholly separate element from the rest of him. Seriously, go run down some old Yogi cartoons and watch for how many times his body is in less than a handful of static poses while the head does most of the acting. Technical shortcuts like leveled character design, repeat backgrounds, and the collar led more established theatrical animation houses like Warner Brothers and Disney to frequently mock Hanna-Barbera's output, but it allowed them to crank out new cartoons at such a pace that within a few short years they had a roster of memorable characters that could stand toe-to-toe with those of older rivals. By establishing TV as a viable platform, they helped widen the career field of animation considerably, and many of the time-saving techniques they developed had a direct influence on later specialties like sprite animation and present-day flash cartooning. So, yeah, that's the story of Yogi Bear's collar. You know, it's funny, all the research for this has reminded me just how damn weird the Hanna-Barbera canon got after a while. Man, I wish I had like a show with severely lax premise restraints, and therefore I could make it about that on a whim. Oh wait, I totally have that, cool. So, okay, see you next week then. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.